This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, we're very fortunate tonight to have as our guest one of my good friends in Alabama and a well-known, well-respected, and legendary lawyer here in Montgomery who's written a really great book. A lot of you in the River region know Tommy Gallion, who's been around Montgomery for a long time now. He's born and raised here in Montgomery, a real Montgomeryan, has roots here. His daddy was Attorney General of Alabama, McDonald Gallion, and well-known. He knows Alabama politics, and he's written a book that I think y'all will enjoy reading. And my friend Art Parker wrote a real good column in the Montgomery Independent about this book. But Tom was on our show about 3 or 4 years ago. He was working on this book. It's called Shadow Government, Southern Style by Thomas T. Gallion III. It's a saga of political corruption from D.C. to Dixie. I think y'all will enjoy this book if you order it on Amazon and Kindle. And Tommy, good to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Steve. Glad to be here.
Tommy and I had a mutual friend that we both loved dearly, Milton McGregor, who is gone to his reward in heaven. And Tommy was his lawyer, and I was a good friend of old Milton. And a lot of the stuff in the book, let's just get right to it, because you put the hay down where the goats can get it in this book. Let's start off by talking about that part. Let's just go back to your history, though. You were born and raised right here in Montgomery.
Well, I was actually born at Camp Pendleton. My dad was in the Marine Corps. Came here when I was 6 months old.
But you got one sister.
I've got one sister.
So when y'all grew up here in Montgomery in that era, there were 2 high schools, Lanier and Lee. You went to Lanier High School, and you went to what Cloverdale Junior High School?
Cloverdale Grammar School, Junior High. Yeah.
And then went on to the University of Alabama.
Yeah.
Did you go to Alabama Law School too?
No, I went in the investment banking business, worked on Wall Street for a year and a half, lived in Birmingham and New York. I cut a deal with the night watchman, night clerk at the Holiday Inn on East 47th. They couldn't rent a room because the steam came under it. Well, number one, I stayed out almost all night back then. I was single, and it was 1966 and 67. It was during the women's liberation movement, and so you didn't have any problem getting a date. But I paid him cash, which I pretty well knew he was keeping it. But I loved the steam, man. It helped my sinuses, so I didn't care. But
you came back and went to law school after that?
Yeah, I went. When I came back, I worked for a company in Birmingham, Andreessen and Company, and then I went and came back to Montgomery with Hendricks Moore and Yardley, Hendricks Moore and Head then, and specialized in bonds. And so I decided to go to law school when the stock market went to heck in a boat. And I was fortunate. I went to Jones and got out in a little less than, right at 2 years, and took the bar, passed it, hung my shingle up with my dad at that time.
What year was this being about when you started?
1972.
72.
And I had also worked during this period of time going to law school. I was the first assistant securities commissioner, and then I worked for legislative. I was doing anything I could to get, pay the bills. I was married at that time.
Now was Lanny? Was she from Montgomery?
Oh,
your wife,
Lord, yeah. I married I'll tell you a funny story. Judge Goodwin, who's on the Supreme Court, former mayor of Montgomery, one of the nicest men I've ever met, and was a good one, of course, and her mother was a Hill, and the Scots. And
the Goodwin's mother was a Hill, or Lanny's?
No, Lanny's mother was
Lanny's mother was a Hill.
Yeah, and so, and the Hills, the Scots, all they founded Montgomery. So anyway, with the after rehearsal party at the Blue Moon Inn, I'm standing next to Judge Goodwin. He's the nicest guy, and it was for family only.
Is he kin to Lanny? Was good Judge Goodwin kin to
Well, that
Lanny?
was her father.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so, anyway, I'm standing there, and Lamb Lion was out in the yard. And I said, I thought this family only, Judge Goodwin. He said, you wait. So after I'd shaken the hands of cousin so-and-so and uncle so-and-so, Uncle Hill, Uncle Goodwin, and all that, I turned to Judge Goodwin and I said, you know, Judge, you don't have to worry about me running around on your daughter in Montgomery because A, I'd get caught, or B, it would be incest. And he laughed. He said, well, you're probably right.
Lanny, you all been married over 50 years, hadn't you?
53 years.
Uh-huh.
And I tell people the two greatest things, miracles that he did was number one, changing the water to wine, and number two, that she lived with me 53 years.
Well, y'all got a good reputation. Y'all been a lot to Montgomery. You practice law here now for, if 72, that's almost 50 years.
Yeah.
Been married 53 years and practiced law in Montgomery for 50 years. And you've seen a lot of politics, a lot of history in the state, and you record a lot of it in this book. Get back to that. Let's talk about that scenario with Bob Riley and Milton McGregor and that thing. I told you prior to the show, I was out there that night that Riley sent all the troopers to raid Victory Lane.
Yeah. Well.
But just go back to the concept of that whole thing, what you talk about in the book.
Well, I mean, look, having grown up in Alabama and having been raised by a prosecutor and investigators, I just knew how corrupt Alabama was, and I kept hoping it would end up being good. As a matter of fact, I think my father said that, and he was not appointed by anybody, he was elected Attorney General. He served under George Wallace, Albert Brewer, and Lurleen Wallace.
Well, he wouldn't have served under because he was elected independently.
Well, yeah, independent. I mean,
he wasn't appointed, like you said. He was elected.
No.
Uh-huh.
And he told me he liked George Wallace, but George Wallace, Dad was more moderate, but Gerald and Seymour and them, in fact, he tried to indict them, and that's another story. But he said the two most honest governors, three governors, Gordon Persons, Albert Brewer, and Lurleen Wallace.
Was most honest.
Said Lurleen she ran them all out. She wouldn't let Gerald and Seymour in the office.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I grew up in it, and going back to Phoenix City, and when gambling has ruled Alabama forever, and it's really interesting because people run around. This put gamblers out of business, and all these Jimmy Swaggart types screaming and yelling about gambling's a sin and you're going to hell. They're all taking money from gamblers, and that's an interesting part of my book. But back to Milton, I guess, Steve, the best way to start this is Milton called me. He said, Tommy, I got a call from Bob Riley, just been elected governor. And I said, well, what about it? He said he wants me to hire his son. What do you think? And I said, I think it'll look bad for you, Milton. I said, number one, I know Bob Riley. He was in my class. I had a hell of a class at Alabama. Bob Riley, the Love Gov Bentley, I grew up with his first wife. And Siegel.
Diane was from Montgomery, that's right.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So y'all grew up together?
Yeah, I went from first grade at Cloverdale through Lanier in Alabama with her.
Is that right?
Yeah, and she was
a quiet lady, wasn't she?
She was very quiet, but let me tell you the real truth. I was in youth legislature and YMCA Leaders Club with her, and she's shy and hardly says a word, but she's a mean little motor scooter. I knew when she had those tape recorders, I said, you can kiss Bob Bentley's rear end goodbye. I said, that's it, because she's not a weak or meek person by any means.
You could tell the way she looked that she was stern, but she was just doesn't say much.
Yes, yeah. She was in my class the whole
time. So y'all grew up together. I remember her being from Montgomery,
Yeah, but
he came right here and sat on that show, he didn't have a dime to spend. Well, he was a doctor, he had some money personally, but he was running on a shoestring, and she was driving him around when they ran for governor. She sat right there, and he sat where you're sitting, and we interviewed him, gave him a chance on television.
He was a deacon in his church, well respected in Tuscaloosa. Same thing that got him that got King David.
Exactly.
One glimpse at Bathsheba, nude walking to a bath, that was the end of it.
That's and as old as he was, too, you know?
Yeah, I mean, he was my age in my class, but, you know, that's...
And but y'all went undergraduate school together.
Yeah.
Bob Riley was undergraduate school in Alabama when you were?
Yeah, I didn't really know him that well.
But he wasn't in a fraternity. You were in ATO, wasn't you?
Yeah, I was, and he was in a fraternity. I've forgotten which one. We played intramural football. I remember him from that. And I don't know about Bentley, but Diane was tried out. But
was Diane tried out?
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know this. Very interesting, but Charlie Grata, also in my class, and Don Sigmund were both in the same deep pledge class.
They sure were.
And people don't even, they say, my God, because they were diametrically opposed politically.
Both of them Mobile, though. All the Deeks were Mobile.
Yeah, that's right. And so, but anyway.
All you Montgomery boys were ATOs.
Yeah, back then. And, you know, now they got kicked off campus like the SAEs and most others for.
But back to Milton's thing though. But you knew Riley and Bentley you knew Riley at that time. But go back to how that thing started about him wanting to hire his son.
All right, so I said, Milton, that'll be a mistake because I know him a little bit, and I know, and a lot of people don't know that, and I believe I'm correct in saying this. Bob Riley never carried his home county.
Didn't carry Clay County? Didn't know that.
Now, and John Bookout, you remember John Bookout, who was my dear friend. He was insurance commissioner and later appellate Supreme Court justice. His wife, Martha, lived next door to the Rileys. And her younger brother was Bob Riley's best friend.
Now, when they lived in Clay County? Or,
in Clay County. Yeah, in Clay County.
He had a chicken business and a used car business here.
Yeah, and she told me the whole story. And she said they called Bob, his nickname was Lion Bob. And when John had taken over as CEO of Woodman Life Insurance out in Omaha, of which I was fortunate enough to serve on the board, but she said that Riley's father would finance the building of chicken houses. The first tornado that came through and these chicken farmers were broke, and it would tear it down, where he would foreclose and take the property without even, he had it worded in there, and then sold used cars. But, I'll hand this to Riley. I call him in my book Teflon Bob. He's slick, and he doesn't like me, and I don't like him, although I helped carry Montgomery County for him in the Republican primary. And then when I found out how, I said, oh God, I can't believe we've got another crook in the office, a dishonest person. And he called me up to his office and said, Tommy, I understand you don't like what I'm doing. I said, no, you're crooked as hell. And he said, well, I'm the governor. You don't talk to me like that. I said, well, let me say it again where you thoroughly understand it. And I got up and walked out. He followed me down the hall, put it all, Tommy, we need him. I said, no, that's it for you. I said, I don't care about it. So, and I'd known what he was doing behind the scenes with Milton, Milton was probably one of the most misconstrued people I've ever met. If I've ever met a nicer, a more charitable, he gave more money to charities than anybody I've ever met. Deeply religious. And he's in a profession that didn't go hand in glove with it, but and loyal person than Milton McGregor.
And family man.
And family. He did nothing with anybody unless his family was with him.
He loved his family, I'm going to tell you that.
And so they went after to destroy him, but I think, Steve, probably what we have to get back to is how all this started when I got a call, from my lifelong friend Winton Blunt III. And Winton and I grew up together, fraternity brothers. I mean, we were just friends forever and remained friends until he died. He called me one day, and because I was a Republican, and said, Tommy, we got a very important meeting. You need to be at my house. I think it was Sunday afternoon. He said, Karl Rove's coming down from Washington. And I said, well, big deal. I don't particularly like Karl Rove. Perry Hooper, who later became Chief Justice, was my law partner. And during his election, I met with Karl Rove. All he could talk about is dirty politics. And I told Hooper later, I said, don't follow this man, because Perry wasn't that kind of man. I mean, was really a very Christian-oriented person, and every lawyer loved him because he'd let the lawyers argue the case. But anyway, he called me, and he said, you got to be there. Karl Rove's coming. I said, okay. Let me stop you right here, Winton. You got to tell me what he's coming for. He said, well, we got it set up. Little Garrett Canary. Now, in my book, I show how the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Her uncle or cousin was Crazy Cy Garrett,
Right.
who set up the gambling and the murder of Albert Patterson. And I cover that starting in the book. And I said, well, so what? Well, she's married Bill Canary. And I said, yeah, I think she's already married him. And he said, well, we've got it set up. We've got, she is going to indict Don Siegelman in the middle of the election. And I said, well, when y'all tried that once up in Jefferson County, and the judge threw it out with Scrushy and him. And what do you mean you're going to have him indicted? We're going to indict him, and we're getting Judge Fulop, who's a new federal judge and absolutely a personal friend of mine. He just made a horrible choice in listening to Bob Riley. Bob Riley's a little like Bob James. Everybody went to jail but James and Riley. But anyway, I said, well, you mean you're going to politically prosecute this guy? Oh, yeah, we got him. I said, on what? Well, Richard Scrushy paid him off to get on the CON board. I said, Winton, you need to get your facts correct, man. I said, Scrushy's been on the CON board, and he wanted to resign, and Siegelman asked him not to at the request of the CON board. Yeah, well, we got him. He gave him $250,000 to get appointed. I said, Winton, one more time. He was already on the CON board. And I said, what $250,000 are you talking about? He said, well, he gave it to him. Well, I didn't know at that time, but it ends up that he did not give a penny to Don Siegelman. He gave it to the educational lottery that,
Pass the lottery bill.
yeah, well, he gave it to the CEO of the Alabama Power Company, Elmer Harris, who was the head of raising the money.
For the library.
And God knows if anybody needs educational money, it's Alabama. But he never gave Siegelman nor voted for Siegelman a penny. So as I get into that, I see what's happening. But let me finish this, what Winton said. He said, Tommy, we're setting up Operation 2010. Now, let me say that Winton would never want to do anything like this. He worshiped the Republican Party. His father founded the Republican Party of Alabama, Postmaster General under Nixon, and he just worshiped the Republican Party. And I kept telling him, I said, Winton, you're making a bad mistake. I said, you don't need to lower yourself to get involved in political prosecution. He said, well, let me tell you, we're setting up Operation 2010. And I said, well, what in the heck is that? You know, Winton liked to have all these little names for things. And he said, we're going to indict the black legislators and some of the lobbyists and probably McGregor. He didn't use McGregor. He said the Democratic contributors, which I knew who he was talking about. I said, Winton, come on now. I said, you're a better man than this. And he was a better man than that, but he went along with it. Well, I thought that was over. I pick up the paper and see, well, Siegelman was indicted. And you know, I never voted for Don Siegelman in my lifetime. But what they did to him was not right. I think everybody now would agree. But that's the way Riley plays things. I mean, they're dangerous, this group of people. And I call them the cabal in my book.
Yeah.
I have sobriquets for everybody. I call Karl Rove, what Bush nicknamed him, Turd Blossom. I call Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions, a person that's gotten farther with less than anybody I've ever known. I call him the Leaping Leprechaun. And I just love nicknames. And so anyway, my book is filled with that. And but the real tragedy in the thing, when you get him back to it, is they indicted Don Sigelman and Richard Scrushy. I'm telling everybody here, never did a thing. They stripped him. He grew up on a farm in Raymer, Alabama, and then Selma, Alabama. All the brothers were smart. Their father had come from Romania, or the grandfather. And the tragedy in this whole thing, as you can see in my book, is what they did to Richard Scrushy. He built from nothing the only Fortune 500 company other than Regions Bank in the United States. They stripped him of everything he had. They put him in prison. He was unable to go to his youngest daughter's wedding, to see the birth of his grandchild. And Richard and his wife were extremely religious people. He doesn't drink, smoke, never has. His parents were very strict. But what they did to them was horrible, but what they did to McGregor was equally as horrible. Now, the good thing for Milton, thank God, is he didn't have the same judge, because I went and watched some of that trial. It was comical. It was so comical I couldn't believe it. And so
the Fuller trial was Sigelman.
Gee whiz. Well, anyway, I cover all this in here, but poor Scrushy didn't know what he was getting into. He didn't understand. He thought he'd been cleared in Birmingham. Why would you try to retry somebody again? But they had the prosecutor. They had Laura Garrett Canary, who claimed she had built a Chinese wall. That's one of the BS things.
And a better judge down here too.
That was the key. Well, they had her and a judge they could control. And he actually, I quote my book out of an article where he told a group of Republicans that Fuller told him that he would hang Don Sigelman. And the tragedy that Mark Fuller, and I told him, I'm playing golf. He was in my golf group. And I said, Mark, you need to reconsider this. Everybody knows you and Sigelman hate each other. Y'all sued each other when he was district attorney down in Coffee County. And I said, this is just beneath you. But anyway, everybody wanted to please Riley. So they shackled him, hauled him off to prison. And Sigelman, they may have could have gotten him for, taking a motorcycle or a watch or some crap. And I don't even know, because I don't know anything about it other than I knew Don Sigelman in college, but not well. But Scrushy is the tragedy in this whole thing.
Sigelman got a pretty bad deal too, though.
Who?
Sigelman.
Oh yeah. Well, let me tell you, are you going to put, even if he had given money to Sigelman,
I know,
are you going to put people that are appointed to non-paying volunteer boards in prison for giving you money, even if he had?
Didn't even go to his campaign. Went to some campaign for the lottery.
Well, in addition to that, you'd have to throw the biggest net God ever created and take the entire Congress out. I mean, how many people do you know, Steve, you've been around in Knoxville in politics, that have been given big campaign contributions that got appointed to a position and anybody said it was illegal to do it?
Lord, that was when you studied political science in college. That's a documented fact that the reason people get ambassadorships is they're the biggest contributor to a campaign.
Absolutely.
That's just part of politics.
Absolutely.
They asked George Wallace one day, said, well, Governor, why do you always appoint your cronies and contributors to get all the contracts and everything? He said, well, who do you think ought to give them to? My enemies?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, but Siegelman's case, he wasn't even, he didn't get anything out of it. It wasn't him a quid pro quo because he didn't go even to his campaign.
It was, I call in my book the worst political prosecution in the history of this country. And let me tell you, Steve, one thing that's very interesting, and I sit back and look at it at my age, is you had the Republicans putting the Democrat Siegel in prison and Scrushy to take him out, and you have the Democrats in Washington trying to put people that supported Trump in prison to take him out.
Right.
I mean, so my whole theory is the one thing Donald Trump has said that's accurate is it is a swamp. I'm a member of the D.C. bar, been a member of the bar for long. I don't think I paid my dues. I got so disgusted last year. I had an office, a small office up there. I could go to the Ritz-Carlton for breakfast. Democrats, Republican congressmen and senators were sitting there cutting deals left and right. That's American politics. Lobbyists sitting at every table. And I don't know, it was just a horrible thing. But fortunately, McGregor, getting back to him, he had two really good lawyers, and Joe Espy and Bobby Siegel.
He sure did.
And
You're right
he
about
also had Byron Thompson, a fair judge.
Right.
And in the middle of that, Thompson called an FBI agent who was, I don't want to say, they say he knew well the court reporter. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, but she would finish transcribing, give it to the FBI agent. He would go give it to Bob Riley that night. But Thompson found out about it and threw him out of his courtroom and said, "Don't you ever come back in my courtroom again." But Espy and Bobby Siegel just opened Pandora's box. All of them got acquitted, but you know what you go through in an indictment of that nature, it'll bankrupt you, it'll
sure
destroy you, and people have short memories. So my book, I try to tell the truth. I try to, and I'm sure they'll come after me. In fact, I've had one of them call me, a friend of his, said they were going to sue me. I said, I'm begging you to. I'll pay the filing fee. I'll walk, crawl, run backwards to accept service because I want to get them under oath. I'll never hear from them.
I love it. Folks, our guest tonight has been Tommy Gallion, who's written a great book, Shadow Government, Southern Style. Y'all order it. It's worth reading it. He tells a lot of inside stuff and stuff we didn't even get into about the Phoenix City thing. Back in history, his daddy was involved with that, and Tommy was a little boy. We thank you, viewers, for watching tonight, and our guest, again, has been Alabama's one of the preeminent lawyers and author, Tommy Gallion, who's written a great book. And thank y'all for watching, and thank Tommy for being with us.
Thank you,
Tommy.
Steve.
Thank you,
Enjoyed
buddy.
it.
Yes, sir.